Welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the Supply Chain Dialogues podcast, where we will be diving into the procurement, supply chain, and operations management world. We got insights for you into new, old, and even outdated truths, and hopefully that will make you more successful in your job by expanding your knowledge of solutions which are out there. My name is Daniel Helmig, your host for the show. I ran supply chains, procurements, and operations globally in 5 industries for more years than I care to remember.
And I'm Aimee, the AI-generated co-host voice of the show. I will ask the questions and provide from time to time facts and figures provided from my other AI siblings.
Thank you, Aimee, and let's dive into the show. Today's episode is called Diversity and Inclusion, short DI, simply human. In many companies generating revenues in the United States, United Kingdom, South Africa, or India, there is an awareness of the concept and regulatory requirements of diversity and inclusion, specifically the sourcing part. However, except for some clear leaders in this field and most other fields while they're at it as well, over the years I've observed that many companies make little to no strides to significantly change the status quo regarding D&I unless governmental contracts or public opinions are at stake. And when I say companies, I mean leaders in companies, people. It is therefore not surprising how many leaders in corporations underestimate the societal needs and regulatory requirements for DI sourcing, while overestimating, by far, the efforts to establish the processes in their own company. And many people outside of the countries that I mentioned before believe that DI is more an Anglo-American phenomenon and they should not really be bothered with that when they are outside of these countries. And then there are those that just struggle with the whole concept as such. So allow me to take a step back, and first I will do that with a very personal reflection, and then we will go more in the societal and governmental aspects of diversity and inclusion sourcing. Now suppose you struggle with diversity and inclusion concepts overall since you were brought up differently. In that case, you can either turn off this podcast, please don't, or follow me on a short reflection if you don't mind. Andrew Solomon, a great writer in the US, brought up the concept of vertical and horizontal identity in one of his books. A vertical identity is when attributes and values are passed down from parents to child, not only through DNA, but also through shared cultural norms, while a horizontal identity is when someone has an inherent or acquired trait that can be foreign even to his or her current environment. For most of us, the vertical identity is very strong, clearly, since we're all brought up that especially our culture and our values are the ones that we all believe to be right. I say believe rather than know for a reason. We do not normally question these values and identities since they came from our mothers and fathers, our friends and neighbors, and that can't be wrong, right? So if I struggle with the notion of diversity and inclusion, I struggle because as well, probably my environment, my parents struggled with that. Now let me get a bit more personal. I'm German-born and raised 18 years after the end of the Second World War near Cologne in the Rhineland in Germany. It's a beautiful piece of land and has very friendly and outgoing people. But this piece of land is as well situated in a country that started 2 of the most atrocious wars in human history. Clearly, I and my fellow German boomers have been raised differently than you would normally expect in a country. We abhorred what has been done by our grandfathers and grandmothers' generation. Suddenly, due to this horrible history, this very normal imprint of what we have as vertical identity did not apply. It makes us, to some extent, allergic to anything that people just believe because it has been always that way. We have seen in our history where this can lead to. This terrible lesson we learned in Germany helps me as a stark reminder that not all values that come through the ages or through my environment are righteous or true. It shows that the identity defined by my parents, neighbors, friends, religion, gender, abilities, and even the color of my skin can and must be questioned when it hurts, discriminates, or disadvantages other fellow humans. So, if you struggle with D&I, take a step back and look at your beliefs. Are they potentially hurting, discriminating, disadvantaging other people? And if they do, give yourself the permission to recalibrate and then utilize this, for example, in the concept of sourcing to do something, because you can make a big difference. You have a lot of opportunity at your hands. Now, let's as well step back and take a look at the societal background and the regulatory settings of D&I, and challenge as well the perception that this is all just an Anglo-American thing and has nothing to do with the rest of the world.
U.S. supplier diversity has its origin in the American civil rights legislation of the 1960s. In 61, President John F. Kennedy amended a federal order to consider affirmative actions for federal contracting. The results of that initiative were to be reported against pre-identified goals. Around the same time, companies like IBM, General Motors, Ford, and many others launched their first supplier diversity programs as we know them today. On a global level, since the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in '92, most countries collaborated to reduce inequality and drive sustainable development globally. Finally, in 2013, the General Assembly set up a 30-member open work group to develop a proposal for the 2030 Sustainability Development Goals. 2 years later, we got the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with 17 UN global goals at its core. It was approved by the General Assembly in 2015, and since then, diversity and inclusion, together with the other important goals like water, energy, climate, ocean, urbanization, transport, science, and technology, are tracked by the UN and reported in the so-called SDG report, the gold standard for sustainable reporting.
I really recommend to check out the 17 goals. It's very well done and a great blueprint for anyone who likes to get active, or any company that likes to get active. So part of the notes that we have, you can as well just click on the 17 UN global goals, but you will find it as well when you Google or ChatGPT it. Now, what we can learn is fairly simple. If you look in the D&I history as such, it just takes 3 things to see change happening: clear goal setting, governance, and reporting, relentless reporting. And hello, this is nothing special or different from any other change we introduce in our corporate or family life day in and day out. Many companies live this change today, or since years. And you can find conveniently in the links some of the companies that I mentioned and their respective diversity and inclusion websites if you're interested. So you have Cisco, Nest, SAP, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, and IBM. I'm selecting all those because they have been seen as excellent via the UN. Smaller firms in the US, such as PagerDuty, Rackspace Technologies, Splice, or companies in South Africa like Nando's, and European smaller companies like Atomico in the UK, Typeform in Spain, and Unbabel in Portugal. They demonstrate that when integrative company policies are written and lived, all stakeholders feel positive impact on their bottom line, employee satisfaction, and market perception. And again, how did they do it? Goal setting, governance, reporting. It's that easy. It may be possible that you not have thought about D&I in the context of your company, and the whole topic of 17 global goals was not on your radar. Even in universities, the global goals are seldomly covered in the business courses, which is, I think, disgrace. But still, if you review the global goals and you can see the rationale behind them, and most members of the human race will be able to see that, you took the first step already on the journey to define a path towards your company and supply chain change. Because awareness, and that's like the anonymous alcoholics, is the first step towards betterment. Now, as always, let's calibrate where we are with some of the questions or statements to help establish the D&I spectrum in your company or enterprise. The focus of my blog is on the supply chain. And while there are massive additional D&I opportunities within your organization and towards your customers. I leave these to your imagination and will just focus on the supply chain, which has a massive impact on the lives of many people if we do it right and introduce the concept of D&I in the selection of suppliers. So, how many of the following 8 statements can you answer with a resounding fact-based yes?
Statement 1. We understand the regulatory D&I requirements in the countries we sell to and act accordingly with a focus on the supply base.
You will be amazed how many companies believe the fulfillment of the D&I requirements belong in departments like governmental affairs or legal or the sustainability team rather than in the hands of the operations team that can actually do something about it. It's great to have these departments involved, but at the end of the day, it needs to be handled via the operations team to change suppliers, to select suppliers, and work with the rest of the organization to do that.
Statement 2. We have set targets and measure the status quo and trend of D&I sourcing over the years.
From my perspective, another fail in many, many companies. There is very little tracking that is being done unless they are located in, as I mentioned before, UK, US. But in most other countries or companies, you will see much less inclination to do the reporting right. And again, that's one of the problems of one of the 3 topics, right? You need to set the goals, you need to get the governance, and you need to do the reporting. If you miss the reporting, it's all nice, but no one can check whether your company is doing the right thing overall.
3. Our track record is consistently improving and reported quarterly in and outside of our company.
Yeah. That's another one, right? Again, I've seen it in many companies. And when I talk about the companies, I don't mean necessarily the companies that I've worked for, but all the suppliers that I've dealt with over the years. And these goes into the thousands. What you often find is that what is being reported is the average hospital temperature. And with that, you do not see which patient is doing well and which patient eventually has a fever. So in our context of D&I, a more granular reporting gives you the ability to see, are we doing good overall? What area are we not focusing on and what can we do about it? And that then increases overall the focus on diversity and inclusive topics as such in the supply base that deals with you and that you select. So let's go to statement 5.
Beyond regulatory reporting requirements, we can calibrate our ESG objectives against the 17 UN global goals and have adequate resources and projects linked to these that are ring-fenced against annual budget cuts.
I start with the second part of the sentence. So what I've seen many times is that great goals, wonderfully defined in shiny little brochures, but unfortunately there's only one person that is actually working on that who never will be able to accomplish the objectives because they are not empowered, they are just not manned up enough, so it's very difficult to do. And what I've as well have seen several times that there are good intentions set 2-3 years ago, and then there are 1 or 2 budget cuts coming, and what is being cut first? Oh, the guys, the ladies from the sustainability or from the ESG department. Yeah, so it's 3, 2, 1, and then at some point in time there is no one left, and it's all being integrated in the organization because we've already been doing well. Not. So that's the first part. The second part is with regard to the overall global goals. So depending on what your company is doing, there are many opportunities beside the typical diversity and inclusion topics where you can work on. And I think for today's leadership, it is kind of like a driver's license that you have to maintain to understand what it takes to actually do something about sustainability goals in your day-to-day life. What is in the sustainability brochures of the company, the sustainability report, the information that is being transferred inside of the company should be something that is actually being done. So the say-do ratio should be high. And the higher this overall is, the more you slam dunk statement 5. Now let's look at statement 6.
Economies of skill or scale are not the main criteria we use to find D&I suppliers, and we understand D&I requires a hands-on approach by the whole internal team, not just procurement.
Again, there are two aspects in this. The first is, very often I've seen companies telling us that, well, it is impossible to find diversity or inclusive supplier in that category. I'd say in 95, 97% of the cases that's wrong. It's just based on the fact that the way that the company looks at suppliers need to change. So I give you an example. If you look in the area of real estate or real estate facility management, and you have, in medium-sized or even large companies, you have a global contract, and then you look for a D&I supplier, you will fail very often because D&I suppliers tend to be regional. Now, if you then have a sourcing strategy which is global or continental, you will not find a supplier. The point is that you have to add to your sourcing strategy as well certain other aspects that allows you to as well look at other suppliers that normally you would not touch because you have economies of scale approach on this. The other side is then that there is a little bit more hands-on approach needed for the whole internal team, not just procurement. And that is as well very important. It is not procurement that has to basically knock on each door from each customer inside of the company to say, hey, would you be willing to work with that diverse supplier? No, the training needs to happen as well inside of the company. Little videos or presentations being done in the senior management leadership teams and as well with the people inside of the organization, talking about the fact what are the benefits that there are with regard to diversity inclusion. And again, not only focusing on the regulatory aspects. Then we get a pull. And if we have a pull, then things change more easily than procurement knocking on the doors and saying, would you please, would you please? Now, statement 7 is,
we promote D&I suppliers internally and cover them regularly in our internal company media.
That's as well something where I've seen a lot of gaps with many companies. Yeah, there is a lot of reporting of Joe and Jill who broke the sales record or launched a new app. But we should as well look at Sven and Gudrun, who sourced to a company where 500 employees now have an opportunity to earn a living. Now, let's look at the last statement, at statement 8.
We are active members of D&I associations like the National Minority Supplier Development Council in the USA, and other associations in Europe and elsewhere, which match diverse suppliers with potential customers.
And while every of these organizations is astonishingly protective with their data, it does make sense to become a member so that you have access to those. So you might want to check that out. If you look at the 8 statements, and most of the statements you have answered with a resounding yes, great. You are a leader in D&I sourcing and no need to listen further. If you, however, answered most of the questions with a no, or you just didn't know, you have an excellent opportunity to update your ESG performance in the interest of your company stakeholders. But in the last piece, we talk then about what it takes to close a gap with regard to diversity inclusion processes in your supply chain. Let's talk first timeline. How long will it take? Based on my experience, I would say 18 months. And that depends on your current lack of focus. It can be as well 24, but it's between 1.5 to 2 years that you can set that up. And you wonder why it's so short? Well, it's not that complicated. I'm a firm believer that if you do things, do them right and do them quick. Everything that takes too long in the corporate environment frizzles out and is not being done. So 18 months to 2 years, good objective in terms of getting D&I in your supply chain. Second, board sponsors. Either the head of HR or the CEO, him or herself, should lead this effort. It's very rewarding overall that you not only do diversity and inclusion inside of your company, but you multiply that manifold in the companies that you deal with. There is a lot that can be accomplished there. When you look at the project, it's a weekly task force with clear objectives that are set by the board or the CEO. We need definition of targets overall, how much, by when, in which category, and by the main spend categories clearly. We have to set up the systems and reporting with clear metrics because, again, 1, 2, 3, right? We said we need clear goals, we need governance, and we need a reporting mechanism so that we can see where we are and have a feedback loop. So at the start, from metrics, I would go with percentage of spend covered, number of suppliers by D&I category, percent of buyers internally or internal customers trained, just to start with it. And later on, you get smarter and you will have much better KPIs on that. The sustainability team of the company should support, not lead. The procurement leadership has to lead because they are in charge of the suppliers. And they should as well have personal objectives. From a change management perspective, communicate the targets and the process and the why. Why are we doing it? And be open with the status quo. It earns you the respect of your employees and actually all the stakeholders. Report progress regularly through the organization and celebrate success and promote internal interested personnel in and out of diversity and inclusion. That's as well very often that you have people that are staying in the small amount of jobs that you actually have there for way too long, rather than spreading the word and becoming a D&I network in the organization. Then invite leaders from D&I associations we talked about, or leading D&I companies to speak at board and leadership meetings. Just make sure that you interview them first. You need good speakers. And if that all is done, how do you sustain the success? Clearly with quarterly reporting to the executive board and as well outside of the company, communicate the progress and establish as well consequence management when targets are not met. This is not a nice to have setup. On the digital and automation side, there isn't that much. Beside the fact that you clearly would like to have the D&I KPIs of a supplier inside of your supply base management, so that a buyer who is looking for a new supplier for whatever, for consulting in the area of Chicago or in the area of Birmingham, that they can find directly a supplier. From a cost perspective, it's marginal. There isn't that much in terms of additional costs that we have to look at. Most D&I suppliers are as well not higher in pricing than anyone else. They need to fulfill as well the requirements and have to compete. And even if there are small deltas, this can be compensated in the same category usually. So the discussion in terms of, we cannot use D&I suppliers because they are expensive, I find completely and utterly wrong. Now, what are the watch-outs? So first watch-out clearly is lip service by all parts of the organization without real action. Yeah, we are completely with you. Yeah, makes sense. And then it dies out because whenever a new supplier is being suggested, no, we can't take this supplier, we can't take that supplier. Then blaming missing progress on the unavailability of quality of D&I suppliers, which is primarily completely inaccurate. And having blind spots about finding the D&I suppliers. They can be found in all walks of corporate life, including but not limited to law firms, accounting firms, insurance firms, everywhere. So, in summary, the journey towards diversity and inclusion in the supply chain requires a commitment from all levels of the organization, but first of all, a clear goal setting by the board or the CEO. By setting clear targets, measuring process, and communicating regularly, companies can make a real difference to promote diversity in the supply chain, not just to satisfy regulatory requirements, but being simply human. As a result, they enhance the reputation in the company, create a more inclusive working environment for all, and with that, improve their bottom line. It's really not that difficult. It just needs focus. And with that, we come to an end. All the best. Bye.
All the best as well from me. Stay safe, stay bold, and why not start by subscribing? Cheerio until the next time.